Okay, I'd like to call the regular meeting of the Windham Southeast School District Board of Directors to order at 6:04 p.m. on September 2nd for our regular order of business. And the first thing we'll do today is we've invited our an attorney who works with us on a regular basis, who is well regarded in terms of helping boards understand the open meeting law. So we've invited him to come in and share with us his wisdom and perspective on the importance of the law and how it operates and what we need to know about open meeting. So Pietro, do you need to share the screen or anything along those lines?
I do. So just a quick question for you, as we're going to talk about during the course of the training we're about to do, under the open meeting laws, a training does not constitute a meeting. And I wonder if the board would prefer to do this privately before it goes on to public business.
No, I think this is fine.
Okay. Well, so if you would, share give me the ability to share screen.
Let's see. Okay, let's try that. Does that allow it? Good.
Seems to.
Yes.
Let's see if we can do a slideshow. How are we doing?
That looks good from here.
All right. Well, so let me introduce myself to all of you. Some of you I know, many of you I know, because we've talked about other issues together in preparation for some of the work you had to do. I was asked by Andy to come talk to you tonight about the open meeting laws. And it is an area that is near and dear to my heart because I get questions almost every day from boards all over the state about how to operate in a way that is consistent with the open meeting laws. And you're going to find that there's incredible tension between, on the one hand, your desire to have an interactive process with the public, something that feels informal and comfortable, and your obligations under the open meeting law. And we'll talk more about that as we go along, but understand this, the open meeting law is not drafted in a way that is conducive to informality. In fact, what it contemplates is a very formal process where public transparency, participation is all contemplated, but in a very structured way. So let's start first with this issue of the open meeting law and to whom does it apply? You'll see from the slide that it applies to boards and their committees. And I sometimes, of course it applies to school boards. Of course it applies to committees of the board. But sometimes I get questions from boards about committees created with people from the public or teachers or others who join the committee. And if it's more than just board members, is this an entity which is governed by the open meeting laws? Do we have to create agendas and warnings and minutes and all the other things we know are incidental to open meetings? And the answer is yes. If there is some formal committee, regardless of membership, that is created by your board, then you do have an obligation to warn meetings and keep minutes and have an agenda all the way you would with a regular board meeting. Well, so then the question becomes, when is it a meeting and when is it something else that is not governed by the open meeting laws? And from the statutes, the definition is this: a meeting is a gathering of a quorum of the members of a public body for the purpose of discussing the business of the public body or to take action. Well, that's a very broad definition. What I would say to you is every time that a quorum of your members get together, and with some notable exceptions that we'll talk about soon, if there is a conversation amongst that group about the kinds of things that pertain to your role in the district, that is, as the governing body of the district, then that is going to qualify as a meeting under the open meeting law. And so it's very important for you as a group, whether you're making those communications via email or telephone or via Zoom, to make sure that you refrain from having those offline conversations. The goal, after all, of the open meeting law is to make sure that there is complete transparency. Now, what I would say to you is that my reading of the open meeting law is that there is a bias and there is a predisposition, and that is toward a belief that the best way to operate government is for all of the conversations that matter to happen in a very public way. And unless there's a very good reason for those conversations not to be engaged in public, where people are warned and have an opportunity to attend, if it's something they are interested in, then those items ought not be discussed by a quorum. Now, meetings can occur, as we are now, by audio or video or other electronic means. And then the one other thing we will talk about as we go along is that the open meeting laws and all of these requirements don't apply where the board is engaged in a quasi-judicial function. And we'll talk about what constitutes a quasi-judicial function and what that looks like as contemplated by Vermont statute a little later in the conversation. So there was a time where this concept of remote attendance didn't seem to matter all that much. It was something that was more academic than anything else. Most people came to meetings. Every once in a while, if a member was indisposed or away and wanted to attend via video conferencing, that could happen. And we had a set of rules that governed that. Board members could attend via electronic means, so that means you could always call in if you were out of the state or out of town and wanted to participate nonetheless. But the rules were you had to identify yourself when the meeting was convened so everybody knew who was attending. You had to be able to hear the conduct of the meeting and be heard throughout the meeting. And you ask yourself, well, why is that? Why can't you as board members get up during the middle of this process and use the restroom or get a drink from the refrigerator? And the answer is this. Again, there is a bias that there's something magical about the dynamic of everybody being together. And when I say everybody, I mean board members, the public observing, the others who are there to participate in the meeting. And the belief is you ought not miss any of it. That if we're going to take breaks along the way, and if somebody is going to step away from the meeting, at least a member of the board, that ought to be during some recess period or at the ends of the meeting. That otherwise everybody needs to be there and participate fully. And that means hear everything that is going on. And when they speak, that they speak in a way where everybody can hear what they think about a specific issue. The quorum is remote. If the quorum is remote, the public must have a location where it can physically attend and participate in the meeting. Now remember, this is all pre-special COVID rules. And at least one member of the public body or a staff designee must be present at that location. I'll share with you a story. I got a call at the very outset of COVID. I had a client, a school district, where the board wanted to meet about some important issues. Nobody wanted to get together, and nobody in the district wanted to have a place where there would be some staff member present and others who wanted to see or hear the meeting could show up, because at the time that was required. And the short answer for those people, for that client, was if you want to have a lawful meeting, then you must do it the way that is contemplated by the statute. If you don't care and you don't think anyone's going to challenge you because you didn't have a location where your staff member could sit and people could show up, then don't, and understand the risk is you could be challenged later on. So let me tell you this, the one thing you will hear me say more than once tonight is there is no open meeting law jail. So if you do violate the open meeting law, you probably, nothing really bad is going to happen other than you're going to be held up as having violated that and face a compulsion to fix the mistakes that you made. Because again, the courts in Vermont and the legislature expect that if you violate the laws, you'll go back, you'll do it again, and you'll make it right. And you'll do it in a way that's consistent with OML. So what were these special rules that we got for COVID? We got rid of this concept that there had to be a physical location, right? And that makes sense. We don't want people getting together. We want social distancing where we can. But always the public had to be provided with a means to attend, including telephone access. So it's not enough that people can join via internet. They have to be able to join by phone. Information about how to access the meeting must be posted with a warning. The board must record the meeting unless circumstances make it impossible. And lastly, you had, instead of 5, you've got 10 days to post the minutes. And I think that at the time this statute was promulgated, the concept was there are not a lot of people at central office to do this work. People were remote, and that might slow things down. And for that reason, you were given some extra time. So when is it an open meeting, right? Like, so we talked about a quorum present, you're talking about board business, or you're talking about the kinds of things that a board must do. But understand this, there's some things which by definition, by exclusion in the statutes will never, ever be a meeting. Communications, including in person or through email, telephone or teleconferencing between members of the body for purposes of scheduling a meeting, organizing a meeting, or distributing materials to discuss at a meeting will never, ever be a public meeting under the OML. Also, and this is important, what we are doing right now should not be a meeting. You have chosen to make it one, and that is your right. But under the law, this is not a meeting. A training is not a meeting. Social gatherings are not a meeting. Conventions, press conferences, and I always found this one to be odd. Press conferences, so long as members did not discuss governmental business. Well, it's hard for me to know what that press conference would be. Maybe it's to celebrate Andy's greatness as superintendent, and that perhaps is not talking about your governmental business, that's talking about Andy's greatness. But those are the times when it will not be an open meeting, and it will not be subject to what I consider to be the very strict rules around how to operate public meetings. So what about this? Sally Super, the superintendent, organizes a board retreat. At the retreat, the members listen to and participate in a session put on, by VSBA. It includes roles and responsibilities and goal planning for the board. Tina Troublemaker sends an email to Sally stating, "You didn't warn your meeting. I wanted to be there. You're going to open meeting law jail." And the question is this, and I often think, right, I went to law school, and we always use the Socratic method at law school. This is too big a group for me to do that. But the question is this, and I want you to think about it. What is this retreat? Because I've gotten this question 5 times in the last 3 months. Can we do a retreat? I'm not waiting for an answer. And the answer to that question is maybe. It depends what you're doing at your retreat. If at your retreat, all you're doing is VSBA coming in and saying, here are the rules around open meeting laws, and this is roles and responsibilities, and we're done, goodbye, then you can do that kind of retreat. You don't need to warn it. It is not a meeting. It is a training. If, on the other hand, at the retreat, you start talking about long-range planning, what are we going to do? What are our priorities? How will we match up those priorities with the time available? When you do that, you have transitioned from training to something else. and that something else clearly falls within the purview of the open meeting law. And so this concept of a board retreat is very attractive, but if you do it, you must be very disciplined not to talk about things that the public has a right to know about. And I'll say it again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, right? Like my kids look at me and they say, what is a record? A broken record, because what I'm saying to you is this: the open meeting laws constantly are telling you in 100 different ways, you as members of a board should let the public see how the sausage is made. That is, your role is to be as transparent as possible in process and in substance. All right, how about this? Board chair, and look, all of my hypotheticals are things that I've had to confront over my years of doing this kind of work, and I think in some ways they're very illustrative of the kinds of issues that I suspect you as board members and you as the public confront. Board chair sends an email to all the board members that looks like this. Dear members, I think that the principal is awful and should be fired. Here are the reasons why. He smells bad and the kids hate him. I saw him drinking on the job. Let's discuss at the meeting, okay? Is that all right? Can we have this kind of communication with a quorum of the board without running afoul of the open meeting law? No. And what I would say to you is this, that when you start talking about the substance of any specific issue, this is not, we're going to talk about the principle. That's a different email. This email says, here are all the substantive reasons why I think the principal should be fired. And that, my friends, is an open meeting law violation. That ought to be talked about at a meeting. Now, whether that's going to be done in open session or in some other form, i.e. executive session, is a different matter entirely. But as we'll talk about soon, there are transparency requirements when it comes to executive session. And we'll talk about all those issues in a little bit. But this first example is one that demonstrates to me, at least, that the board chair did not understand requirements of OML. One board member replies to all of them, got it. I had similar worries. Let's discuss at the meeting. Is that little bit a conversation of substance such that it ought not happen via email outside a meeting? Yes. Yes, I had similar worries. What is, again, if we as a board are trying to behave in a way consistent with what the law requires, we should talk about, well, we need to have a conversation about the principle, end of discussion. I need to know agenda items. Here are some performance evaluations for the principal. Please read them in preparation for the meeting. Those kinds of communications are all fine. These kinds of communications are not. Another member forwards it to a different member. I think this is a frame job. Let's fight it. Is that a violation of the open meeting law? No. No. Should it be? I don't know. I'm not in the legislature. But what I would say to you is this, that single communications, that is if I'm on the board, in my communications with another board member, whatever it's about, substance or otherwise, if it's just to another board member or two or three, something short of a quorum, I can do it. It will never be a violation of the open meeting law. But that does raise an interesting question. I often receive phone calls from people like Andy, superintendents, who say, my board chair asked me to raise this issue with you. There is a board member who is engaged in serial communications, meaning he will call and have the same conversation with 4 out of 5 board members because that's the way she or he gets around the open meeting law. No, that doesn't get around the open meeting law because really, in effect, it is the same. right? I suspect, I've never seen a Vermont court case yet on point, but I suspect that if what we see is a pattern that includes a quorum of the board in a substantive conversation outside the context of a meeting, a court would conclude it is a violation of the open meeting laws. All right, the entire board attends a conference on equity in schools. The program is excellent and everyone is excited. Over lunch, the board sits together and discusses the topic and how it would be excellent to make an agenda item for the next meeting. One member suggests that it be specific to professional development training for teachers on how to implement equity. The rest of the members nod in agreement, and the board chair says she will put it on the agenda and they can move for a vote on the training. Okay, so we know that trainings are not meetings. There's something else. But if we engage in a conversation about equity as an agenda item, are we violating the open meeting law? It's a question of degree, isn't it? And the answer is probably not. Probably we're just fine as long as we don't get into the substance, that is the merits of why equity is good to have as a PD item or not. The moment we do, then the public is cheated of those comments. And in the end, that's what it's about. The public has a right to know your utterances on these issues, where the recipient of those communications is broad enough to include a quorum of the board. Quasi-judicial functions. That sounds awfully fancy. A quasi-judicial function are all those things you do as a board where you look, sound, and behave like a court. It is where you are adjudicating rights as between parties, whether it's the district and somebody else, or as between two parties. And those kinds of proceedings must be conducted under constitutional concepts of due process. Now, like any court proceeding, the public doesn't have a right to speak. Like, you know, if you're in a mini trial on the termination of an employee because that's what's required under the law, 30 people from the public who love the teacher don't get to come up and say, "We love the teacher, stop what you're doing." That's not something that is contemplated by the open meeting laws. When you are engaged in a quasi-judicial function, your job as a board is to act like a judge and a jury, and the public mostly will either have to sit silently by and watch, or in the alternative, and most often this is the case, it will be in private. And you as the board will have no members of the public there. Witnesses will troop in and they will give their testimony and then they will leave, and then you as a board will have to make some decisions about how you are going to adjudicate those rights. The statute defines whether the public can attend. So for example, I'm involved now in a matter that includes the termination of a principal. And the statute for termination of principals, 16 VSA section 243, says it can be in public if both parties agree. And if both parties don't agree, then it will be in private. Any decision must be made public. So this isn't the Star Chamber where you have your private meeting and nobody ever knows the result. It will either be a public decision, or in the alternative, the decision will be written in a document which will be available to the public. So what are those due process rights? And I don't mention this to bore you. I do it because you as board members, at least the board members I'm talking to right now, need to understand this role because it informs how you behave outside of the context of a quasi-judicial function. When you're having one of these hearings, the parties have a right to have notice of the specific allegations against them. They get to hear the evidence in the form of testimony. They have a right to cross-examine. They have a right to introduce their own evidence. They have a right to an impartial finder of fact. They have a right to an attorney. And the fifth item is the one that I worry about for all of you. Boards tend to want to know a lot of things. They look at my friend Andy and they say, Andy, what's going on here? And tell us everything that's going on with that employee who you mentioned is having problems. And what is it? And my response to all of you is this: the more you know, the less you can do. And if you want to sit as an impartial finder of fact, if we ever get to a place where there's an expulsion hearing, or there is an issue under your HHB policy, or if there's an employee termination proceeding that goes to the board, if you know too much, then you will be disqualified from participating in the process. And if you don't disclose you know too much, there is a danger that that can be used against you in litigation, demonstrating, again, that you are neither fair nor impartial. So what I would say to you as board members is this: refrain. In areas where it may end up with you as part of a quasi-judicial proceeding, there are many things that it is better you do not know if you are to preserve your role as an effective finder of fact. How do we protect the public's right to attend meetings, right? Remember, so the drumbeat from me during the course of this training is the public's got a right to know, the public's got a right to attend, the public has a right to challenge us if they disagree with the way the board is conducting the meeting. But at the same time, the public's ability to do that will be restricted by a very formal process. Lots of opportunities to challenge, but only within the context of the process contemplated by the statute. So the public has a right to attend all meetings. Decisions of the board must be made in open session, except these quasi-judicial things I talked to you about. We must have an agenda. Agendas must be made available prior to the meetings if requested. They should address, now this is the part that I want you to hear me. They must address with specificity what will be discussed and or decided. And the board should never act on an item that is not on the agenda. And you look at me and you say, why? If somebody has a great idea during the course of the meeting, why can't we just incorporate that into what we're doing? And the answer is this: because you as a board have a duty to notify the world, your public, what you're going to be talking about, so that people who are really interested in those subjects can come to the meeting and hear what you're saying, and during the public comment period, respond to what you are saying. And one of my frustrations oftentimes is to see agendas that are so ambiguous as to be useless to members of the public. And I encourage all of you to make sure that your agenda items are a message to the public. Hey, there is an issue and we think it's important enough to talk about. And we're going to describe it in a way where if you think it's an important issue, you will know to attend. Meetings must be warned if they are not regular meetings, and regular meetings are adopted as a resolution, so you don't need to warn them, right? So, we have our regular meeting, it's every other Wednesday. This is the way we do it. Those are different than the special meetings. Okay, and this one, I had this issue today. A client said to me, oh, well, that's a very interesting topic you've raised. I need to bring it to the board. We'll have an emergency meeting tonight. And the answer is no. Here's my hypothetical. The superintendent has developed a drinking habit. He has been calling employees in the middle of the night and using foul language. The board chair finds out on Sunday. She is shocked. Of course she is. And decides this cannot go on. She calls an emergency meeting for Monday evening. Are we okay? Is this a proper emergency meeting? Your superintendent has gone around the bend, gone crazy. No, no. This is exactly the kind of meeting where we need to let the public know, and a special meeting. Emergency meetings are like the school collapsed because of the hurricane, or 30 people died, or something really crazy. We don't have time to give the public the necessary notice. We've got to do it right away. And so, my client today who said, oh, that's an important issue, we need to talk to the board right away. The answer was no, we can wait till tomorrow. We will give the public its 24 hours, and we'll give the public an opportunity to evaluate the agenda to see if it's an item that the public wants to attend. And emergency meetings don't give that public that opportunity. And that's why they ought to be rare, few and far between. All right. So we talked about, making sure that people get to come who want to come, who want to be involved in an issue, or at least see how the sausage is made around an issue. But who gets to say what? We've got the meeting, and this is what the statute says. The public shall be given the reasonable opportunity to express its opinion on matters considered by the public body during the meeting. Okay, so there must be, let me translate for you. There must be an opportunity at some point during the meeting for the public to weigh in on what it's heard. Statute doesn't say when that might be. That can be at the end, that can be during. We'll talk about how it's got to be structured, but this is wholly within the discretion of the board as to when the public gets to give its opinion. 16 VSA section 554 restricts the right to speak on any issue to persons who reside within the district. It's really hard for me to reconcile 312 with 554. And I would say the better practice is always this: if people care enough to come to your meetings, and we have a public comment period at the end of the meeting, everybody ought to have the opportunity to speak. Public comment will be subject to reasonable rules established by the chair. And for those of you who are going to sit through all of this, there's a theme developing, and that is the chair has lots of power. So my friend David has lots of power. And one of those powers is to establish the rules of the road when it comes to public comment. And not just free-form public comment at the end of a meeting, but all public comment. And that public comment, those comment rules might be something like, you have a specific amount of time. There are some civility issues that we will enforce, and I'll talk about that. But it is important, I would say, to all of you, and especially for the public, to understand what those rules are going to be in advance. What causes me heartburn is when those rules are invoked for the first time, when somebody whose speech we don't like, or somebody who is going on too long is speaking, and then it looks selective to me. And so it is very important, I think, for the public to be informed at every meeting in a way that's transparent, that there is an objective standard that will be applied both in terms of the manner of speech, not the substance, the manner of speech and the duration of speech. Oh, and then there is a statute in Vermont that says that that the public may request a written response on matters considered by the board. So if you as a board have taken something under consideration, a member of the public is entitled to send you a letter or an email and say, I want to know, your rationale for whatever it is you did or said. But of course, this is the board, it's not an individual member. And sometimes if the board has taken no action, it might be impossible to respond. Are there any questions? I've been talking for a while. So as I sometimes say when I draw juries, hearing no questions, I will move on.
Actually, we do have one, Pietro.
All right,
We
let's
have a
hear it.
question from Kelly Young, a board member.
Yes, I'm wondering if I appreciate having this open meeting training out in the public, because I think it's helpful for the public to understand what our requirements are and what our boundaries are. But I also wonder whether it would fulfill the requirements for open meeting if we asked our questions in not in open meeting, because I wonder if any of that will fall into attorney-client privilege. I'm assuming that you are the attorney for the board, right?
I am the attorney for the board, and yes, my advice, that is my answer to your questions, is attorney-client privilege generally. And that's, one of the reasons why I always shrug when boards want me to do this in open session. And so perhaps if you like, we can go into executive session to talk about, whatever advice, but if it's not on the agenda, I don't know how you go about doing it.
No, I mean, if we have questions about this training.
Oh, later on, you mean?
Yes.
Of course, you can invite me to an executive session, of course.
I didn't know where it would fit in there, but I was just concerned that if we were asking things from like, our experience doing this or that or whatever, that some of that might fall into the attorney-client privilege. I made some assumptions there.
Yeah, no, Kelly, I think you've got 100% right.
Okay, so I will hold my question until later. Thank you.
All right, Kelly. So better government through technology. Bridget, board chair, leaves the chat function on during Zoom meetings. She finds it gets the public involved. And my experience is, this is my aside, it surely does. It can be concerning from time to time when the public uses profanity and fake profiles. What are the best rules for public participation during the Zoom meetings? So it may be hard for you to reconcile what I'm going to say about chat function with everything you've heard me say so far, but I don't think so. My best advice is always this, that would you allow people at an in-person meeting to just get up and start shouting out things during the course of the meeting without identifying who they are and maybe using fake identities? Because that's what the chat function is. It's just people blurting things out during the course of the meeting. And as we'll see, that's not consistent with the open meeting laws. That's not consistent with Robert Rules of Order. And it's not consistent with the concept, the fundamental precept that everybody identifies themselves, that everybody gets, that we get to see how all of this goes down, and that there is a specific order to things. So I'm not a huge fan of chat function during the course of Zoom open meetings. So what are these reasonable rules for public participation? And I'm not going to make a value judgment here because I'm not on a board and every community has a different way of approaching these issues. But what I have seen most often is that there are rules, and the rules seem to make sense for boards all over the state. So you can limit the speaking to a reasonable amount of time, and that is typically 2 to 3 minutes. And that doesn't sound like a long time, but my guess is if you ask somebody to speak on an issue for 2 to 3 minutes, they'll run out of things to say. Civility is required, right? You can't yell and scream. You can't, you can if you permit it, but that is a limit that the open meeting law contemplates. No profanity, no screaming. You can limit repetition, but what you can't do is tell people what they can say based on subject matter. There needs to be neutral rules that are applied in an unbiased fashion. So And before I get there, let me go back for a second, because I do want to talk about that. I often get this question from administrators. Well, there was some member of the public who came to the meeting, and that member of the public wanted to talk about a specific teacher and how angry he or she is at this teacher, and they do a bad job, but we stopped them because that was a personnel matter, and we don't talk about those things at meetings. And my answer is no. The public is not restricted. If the members of the public want to talk about a specific teacher, if they want to talk about a specific student, they may do so, and we cannot stop them. Now, what the board does in response is entirely up to the board. The public comment period or the public statements are just that. They're statements. Sometimes they're even questions, but I will tell you, there is nothing in the open meeting law, and there is nothing in Robert's Rules of Order that contemplates a question and answer session between members of the public and the board. That is a creation of yours and yours alone. If that is the way you want to run your meetings, you can. I don't know that it's consistent with the open meeting laws, but that is not something you are required to do. And my advice often when asked is, well, what do we do if somebody asks us about a specific teacher or wants to talk about FERPA protected information? My response is this: say nothing. Explain to people in advance, because you have to be civil. You have to explain the rules of the road, but tell people in advance. We're not here to answer questions. We're here to listen to your comments, to take them in so that we can be informed about your feelings when it comes time to make decisions about the operations of the district.
We have another question, Pietro, from Sean, I think Sean Murphy.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, Sean.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can.
I'm just wondering, at town meeting, if somebody wants to speak and they are not a member of the town, they have to get permission from the town in order to be able to speak. And I was wondering if the same thing would be true in a school board situation if you had somebody, as an example, that was from a different state, out of district. And
so Sean, in answer to your question, what I would say is this: you saw a little bit earlier this slide where there appears to be a tension between the open meeting laws and the rules specifically about school districts. And I would suggest to you the best practice is this: if somebody bothers to come to your meeting and they want to speak during the public comment period, let them talk. As long as it's within the context of these reasonable restrictions, couple minutes, civility, no screaming, no profanity, I would not restrict them. Does that answer the question?
yes.
Okay. So who and what gets on the agenda? Barbara Busybody wants to discuss her concerns about a teacher at school with the board. She has been after you for months and is now very agitated. She knows she has a right to speak. What do you do if she speaks and demands the board respond right now? What do you do? What is the public's right to get on the agenda? And that is a frequent tension for boards. How do we create an agenda, and what right does the public have to demand certain items get on the agenda? And the answer to that question is the public in the end really has no right to insist any item get on the agenda. The agenda is a document that is created by the board chair in advance of a meeting, and no other persons have a right to create that agenda. Now, a good board chair will be collaborative. A good board chair will, take the temperature of the public and make some decisions in light of that to create a document that gets to the pressing issues of the day. But if you're asking me as the lawyer for the board and what is contemplated by the open meeting laws, our friend Barbara has no rights under this hypothetical. And of course, this hypothetical addresses the other issue, which is, I demand you respond to my concerns about your employee. And the answer is, you can if you want to, but you don't have to. All right, let's talk about the agenda. This is, these are the nuts and bolts. Chair establishes it. You heard me say that. It can be modified at the beginning of a meeting, but that's the only time. And I would say this to you, it is not a good practice to routinely modify the agenda at a beginning of a meeting. It looks dishonest. It is important for the public to know in advance what you are going to be up to so that they can come and be there while it happens. The modification requires a majority vote of the board, and the purpose of the agenda is to notify the public of the matters to be considered at the meeting. And so let's think about that for a moment. If I am a board member and Andy is my board chair and we're in the middle of a meeting and I go, well, wait a second, what about issue A? It's not on the agenda, but I feel the urge to talk about it right now, Andy. The answer has to be under the open meeting law, sorry, we're not having that conversation, Pietro. Save it to next time. And that's a real challenge, I think, for boards. There's a desire to have a free-flowing process where everybody is comfortable and where good ideas get explored in the moment. But that's not what the open meeting laws contemplate. Because think about it, your good idea may be exactly that, a great idea, something that bears conversation. But if we are being a disciplined board, what we need to do is wait until we can advertise that topic to the public to make sure anyone else interested in that idea can show up. And that, that goes back to my chat function, right? Like, how do we get chat functions bringing up issues that people want to talk about that are not on the agenda and square it with the open meeting law? My answer is you can't. Now, that doesn't mean in public comment period at the end of the meeting, members of the public can't get up and talk about whatever they want. Of course they can. But if the board is going to start responding to items raised that are not on the agenda during the course of the meeting, they're robbing members of the public of their opportunity to be there and participate and observe conversation and debate about that issue. All right, the board wants to talk about the Peter Principal's job performance. The agenda indicates that the executive session will be regarding a confidential personnel matter. A member of the public demands to know who the employee is and what conversation will occur. This is something that happens a lot. Boards love to say, confidential personnel matter. Is that enough? No, that is not enough. Does the member of the public get to know who the employee is? Well, I think the member of the public gets to know that it might be an administrator within the district, a teacher within the district, but there needs to be some level of specificity. And the member of the public needs to know that it has to do with job performance or discipline or an investigation or whatever that item is. And the reason, of course, I mean, remember, one reason we have these agenda items is so the public can show up and see the stuff and hear the stuff they're interested in. But the other is this: the public deserves the right to challenge your decision to go into executive session by virtue of that agenda item. And if the agenda item is so vague as to be unchallengeable, then we are not behaving in a way that is consistent with our obligations. We need to let the public know enough where they can nod their heads and say, oh yeah, that does belong in executive session. Or no, I will challenge you and go to court to get a ruling that that conversation has to be an open session. Minutes. All right. So we know that they're required for all public meetings. They cover all topics and motions that arise at the meeting and give a true indication of the business of the meeting. What is What does that mean? A true indication of the subject of the meeting. Well, my friends, I've seen lots of minutes, and some are fabulous and others are not. What I'd say is this: the minutes are a little bit like the agenda. We need to have enough information so that people can understand what happened. This is for your benefit, board members. Those minutes are in some ways the only lasting record that reflects whatever it is you said or did at that meeting. And so it better be a document that is relatively comprehensive. So here are the items. I've listed 1 through 4. These things have to be in it. Everybody present? Anybody participating? Any motions, proposals, resolutions, and whatever was done by the board. The results of any vote with a record of individual votes if a roll call is taken. All right, those things have to be there. But there are a variety of reasons why that might not be enough for you, why you may want more. You are creating, by virtue of these minutes, a legal record of everything that happened during that time. And remember the process we follow for minutes. Somebody takes them, they're presented to us as a board, the board reviews them, and the board votes them accurate and sufficient. Where you are doing that, you are endorsing everything in it as a proper reflection of your meeting. And so I would encourage all of you, I've never seen your minutes, so I have no reason to say they're great or to criticize them, but I would encourage all of you to carefully consider what those minutes look like, what your expectations are for minutes, to make sure they're consistent with what you're hearing from me now. All right, executive session. There are 2 kinds of subjects that I'll call it 2 buckets for executive session. One is all those things where if we make the right finding, then we get to go into executive session. And the finding is this thing, right? Like you have it all written down or committed to memory, right? A premature general public knowledge would clearly place the blah, 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 right? You all know that, right? It's like a mantra that you repeat to yourselves. So those things are all here, A through F, right? Contracts. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, we're not going to negotiate. We're not going to tell the universe our negotiating position on a contract. That'd be crazy. On the other hand, there are plenty of times where we can talk about contracts where we're not giving anything away. We're talking about whether we're satisfied or dissatisfied, or whether we think we ought to enter into another one. I mean, all of those things, maybe there wouldn't be any premature public knowledge creating a substantial disadvantage. Maybe those things are all fine. But certainly where we are engaged in negotiations around contracts, let's get our strategy session in executive session. Labor relations agreements with employees, yeah, right? I mean, like if you're gonna have strategy sessions about your labor negotiations as a board, the board committee, right? And you have a board committee responsible for those labor negotiations. That committee ought to be able to meet in private, because what use is your strategy if the other side knows where you're going? Arbitrations or mediations, that makes sense. Grievances, other than tax grievances, but grievances, right? Like, so when there is a grievance under your collective bargaining agreement from the support staff or the teachers, that can go into executive session. And then pending or probable civil litigation, where we are a party to the litigation. And then of course, my favorite, the part where I'm giving you advice. And there may be times like right now, I'm giving you advice. That is what you are paying me to do at this very moment. And you have made a decision that you don't think that there's going to be a substantial disadvantage. And so this is all public. The second bucket, more executive session, the second bucket of things, the the passel of subject matter that gets you into executive session, you don't need a disadvantage, right? Like if this is the topic, you go, or you can go. Buying real estate or leasing, hiring or firing public officials, disciplinary action, things that present a clear and imminent peril to the public safety. You know, an example that that fulfills number 5, I think, is if you as a district are working on an active shooter policy or procedures and the board is involved, we don't want everybody to know, right? Like that's something where public safety, the safety of your school is involved, and maybe this ought to be confidential. You don't want the active shooter to know your plans in the event that the active shooter shows up. Records exempt from the access to public records, right? So we live in a universe where most of the documents created by you as board members, including emails, are public records. And, well, I'm sorry, let me say it again. They're all public records and must be preserved. Some of them must be produced upon a request, others not. And if what we're talking about is the ones that you don't have to produce, then those might support an executive session. And then finally, kids. If you're going to be talking about the academic records of specific kids, and they're covered by FERPA, or you're talking about the suspension or expulsion of students, that ought to be in executive session. And that you don't need to find any advantage, or I'm sorry, disadvantage to anyone. John Smith wishes to challenge the superintendent's preliminary residency determination and present sensitive information about his daughter's emotional condition to the board. Does he get to do that in executive session? And the answer is no, no. This is, so residency determinations, and I don't know if you all have been doing those. Typically choice towns have those more often than others, but residency determinations are quasi-judicial proceedings, but they often are in open session. And the reason is this, that members of the public have a right to appeal any residency determination made by a board. It's not just the parties, the board or the family, but even the public if they disagree with what the board says. The board is preparing for negotiations and has a lawyer explain how the current contract works in application. Is that going to be an executive session? Well, maybe that's legal advice, but maybe there's no substantial disadvantage. The board wants to discuss the settlement of a lawsuit that it recently resolved. Probably not. The lawsuit is over. That's something the board ought to be talking about in public. And remember, if there's any ambiguity, the default is always, we will do this in public. A board member, you know, one of the issues I often hear is that, well, we have a board member who is misbehaving. Now, thankfully, you have none of those, but there are places where that exists. And this person is disclosing executive session information and won't wait their turn during meetings, and we don't know what to do. So we're going to go into executive session and yell at her or him or whomever. And the answer is no. That's not one of these topics. Board governance is something you must do in open session. The public has a right to know what that conversation sounds like. So here are the executive session rules, right? I'll be quick. I said I promised Andy I'd be an hour, and look at this. We're already close to an hour. Andy, sorry, my friend. So we will talk about executive session rules. No, can't take any action. You can invite in whoever you want. It only requires a majority where it's for school boards. You don't need to take notes, but if you do, they are exempt from the Public Records Act. So they never have to be produced, except if you get involved in litigation, and then they must be produced. So my best advice to all of you is there's a reason it's executive session, right? It's so you can talk informally about things that ought to be in private, and creating notes seems to me to be inconsistent with that. Yeah, what do you do? So this is not open meeting law, but this is a challenge. Like, what do we do if we have board members who are breaking our rules, breaking the open meeting law rules, talking to people about matters that were in executive session, emailing a quorum of the board about things that are substantive? What do you do? Remember that bad joke I told you at the beginning that there's no open meeting law jail? Well, there's no open meeting law jail. There really isn't. And there's no mechanism to get rid of Tim Talk-A-Lot. Tim can serve out his term until it's all done. Tim gets to come to every meeting no matter what a bad citizen he might be. And so the reality is this: there is very little, if anything, you can do other than persuade, cajole, publicly censure if you want. But in the end, these are folks who are elected from your community. And if your community supports them and wants them to continue to participate in the board, then they're entitled to do that. Okay, so we're almost done, and I'll speed through the rest of this, but this is important to me, right? The school board meetings have to be done according to the OML, and Robert's Rules of Order shall, that's what the statute says, shall govern the conduct of school board meetings. I'll say it again, shall. And my guess is that we are not particularly good at using Robert's Rules of Order. It's just inconsistent with the kind of relaxed environment that school boards in Vermont typically encourage. But just understand this: you are violating the law by virtue of departing from Robert's Rules of Order. So I would raise the issue for your consideration. And here's some of the basics, and I can share these slides with you if you like. But look, I mean, the people don't get to just talk, right? The chair has to recognize any member. Motions have to be seconded. The chair has to place issues before the assembly by stating the question. Like, this is a very formalistic process. There's, right? So there, you consider the question, you close debate, you call the question. Like, it's this formulaic thing. And this is not my moment to teach you Robert's Rules of Order. That's a much longer training than what we're doing right now. But the point of these slides is this: is to raise with you the relative formality and procedure-laden nature of Robert's Rules of Order. So let me just keep moving, because I am at the end of my hour and I don't want to bore anyone. So the duties of the chair, David, this is my favorite part for you. You get to open the meeting at the appropriate time and call the meeting to order. We don't have votes to start the meeting. You announce in the proper order the business before the assembly that day. David, you recognize members who are entitled to the floor, and if you don't say yes, they don't talk. You state and put all questions to the vote and announce the results of each vote. You enforce the rules relating to debate, order, and decorum. And trust me, under Robert's Rules, there are a lot of those. You expedite business in every way compatible with the rights of the members. And when we're done, you tell everybody to go home, and you adjourn the meeting with no vote. Right? So here's some rules. We got to move to amend, right? If we want to change a pending motion, we got to move to amend. There are points of order that can be raised, right? Like if somebody is not following the Robert's Rules of Order and we want to call them out, then they don't even need to be recognized. They just get to interject, point of order. And they get to say however it is they think that things are not being done consistent with the rules. And David, you get the first whack at it. So here's my example. Almost done, folks. Albert Unfocused is a board member, and he always goes on too long. And includes subjects that don't relate to the motion. Is he impatient? Is sick of it? He loudly interrupts Albert, raises a point of order without being recognized by the chair, says, Albert has been talking for 15 minutes about an issue unrelated to the pending motion. Make him stop. And the board chair considers it, agrees. Albert, you're finished. Next. Does David get to do that with you? Yes. Yes. So you can see, look, if somebody starts talking about something that ain't on the agenda, point of order, this isn't on the agenda. David, you're right. We can't talk about it. And that's absolutely appropriate. Albert is furious. This is unfair. He moves to appeal the decision. Right now, we're back to Robert's Rules of Order. No second is needed for an appeal. The chair must now put the matter to a vote. A majority can reverse the chair's ruling. Absent a majority, the chair's ruling stands. So if somebody starts talking about something off the agenda, point of order, David says, stop it. That person says, I want to vote. And the vote then decides whether we get to talk about the thing that's not on the agenda that we shouldn't be talking about. What if Connie Compromise asked to amend Albert's motion, letting him speak for 3 more minutes? We're right back to Robert's Rules of Order, right? You can make motions, they can be amended, you can, but this is a process, and it looks nothing like your meetings, I bet. But this is what it should look like if we're going to be strictly following the rules. Okay. That's what I have to say tonight. And I look, so I promised my friend Andy that I would only go for an hour. I'm a little over an hour and 5 minutes. But the point is this, and I'm glad to answer any questions you might have whenever you like, an hour later or by email or by telephone. But the point is this, this board stuff is tricky. The open meeting law places lots of obligations on you. Most boards try awfully hard to do it the right way and to find the way that works for them and their community. But, look, in the end, there's some guiding values, and those guiding values are transparency to the public, accountability. When you try to do things in private, you got to show why, and you have to justify it. And then the last one is that, look, meetings are supposed to be a formal thing. That's what's contemplated by the statutes, and you may do it differently, but if you do, then you're making a decision to depart from what the statutes urge you to do. That's it.
Well, thank you, Pietro. That was a lot of information. A lot of it was really familiar, and some of it was not, and was surprising to me. And I can see a few places where we're going to need to make adjustments just because it makes good sense. I just want to check and see if Kelly has a question, and any other board members that have questions. We can take a few minutes for questions before we get back to our regular business. So go ahead, Kelly.
So I appreciate, thank you for this training. I appreciate hearing all the information. And I would like it if we could have the slides sent to us. And I guess I would request maybe to send an email with, and I could copy David, but to kind of review the slides and maybe see if I can formulate my questions in something that's an intelligent sort of manner, if that's acceptable.
Great, great idea,
Happy
Kelly.
to do it.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from the board? Okay, well, again, Pietro, thank you. My advisor who said that you do a great job was correct. That was really terrific.
What was that, David?
Yes.
Was that David Chase?
Yeah, Dave Clark, yeah.
Dave Clark, sorry. Great guy. I love David.
Yeah, he's a piece of
All
work.
right, well, listen, folks. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present to all of you. And again, so look, David, if any of you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them either at some meeting, hi Frank, or via email or telephone. Again, have a good evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Take care. Okay, we're going to move to the clerk's report and the warrants at the same time. We'll do consent agenda. So I want to remind whoever makes the motion to first say their name and then say they are moving the item. In this case, the consent agenda for the approval of the minutes from August 19th, 2020, and the warrants as presented of June 29th, July 7th, July 20th, July 27th, August 3rd, August 10th, August 17th, and August 24th, and payrolls from July 3rd, July 17th, July 31st, and August 14th. Jackie?
Thanks, David. Jackie Reynolds from Brattleboro, and I move to approve the aforementioned minutes, warrants, and payroll.
Thank you. Can we have a second, please?
Seconded. Thomas Nolan from.
Thank you, Thomas. It's been it's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda as presented. Board members, if anyone has any questions or discussion.
Yeah, I would just want
Kelly?
to.
Sean, just a sec. Kelly had
Oh,
put
sorry.
her blue hand up.
Sorry.
Blue hands go
just-
first.
I just want to say that it shows that I was not there. I actually was a little late getting to the meeting, so I just wanted to mention that.
Great. Oh, okay. Thank you. I will remind Barb. I'm gonna write that down and remind Barb to change that. Great. Thanks, Kelly. And any other questions from the board on the motion?
Yeah, I raised my hand before, I'm sorry.
Yes. Okay.
But I also wasn't mentioned. I did email, but I don't know if it's been changed or not. I wasn't listed as a attendee.
At the August 19th meeting?
That is right.
Thank you, Sean. I will let Barb know about that too. Thank you. And Tara Castine, is this a question about the motion?
No, sorry. It was in regards to your
I'm
recognition of.
going to ask you to wait then so we can finish with the motion.
Yep, that's fine.
Thank you. So again, any other questions from the board? Okay, please unmute and indicate your favorable vote for the motion by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion is passed as presented. Let's see now. Next is the communications. I don't believe there was anything in communications. Just going to take a quick check here. No, nothing that's not going to be addressed. So that brings us to the committee reports. And let's start with the Finance Committee. Sean, did you manage to schedule a meeting?
No, we did not.
Okay.
But I'd like to say a couple of things, if I could. I did receive all the warrants and payrolls that you just referenced, and I went through them as carefully as I could. And so I did have a conversation with Frank, and I think later on in the meeting, he's going to present some great documents on where we are financially. So, and we will try to have a meeting next month.
Great, thank you. I didn't ask if there were any, I got your email about about messages or questions for Frank about the warrants, and I didn't hear, I don't believe you got any. It indicated that you hadn't heard any, so I didn't ask you about that because I thought we already had the communication. I'm glad I was right that there weren't any. Great, thank you. Okay, Personnel Committee, also I don't believe I saw an agenda for. Did the Personnel Committee meet? No.
Oh, we have not.
Okay. Policy and Amendment Committee did not meet, did we, Ann? I
We
missed
did
it.
not, but I'd like all members to email me their availability for next week, please.
Okay, thank you. And Programmatic and Performance Equity Committee did not meet, but the chair did have a baby. Her name is Sky, and from the picture, she's quite gorgeous. I was going to put the picture up on the in the waiting room, but I didn't get a chance to check with Emily, so I didn't take that liberty. But maybe next week we'll put the baby picture up. The Climate Crisis Task Force, Thomas, were you scheduled today? Did you meet today?
No, we weren't scheduled today. We're scheduled, on, I believe, the 15th,
Okay, great.
middle of the
Thank
month.
you. Yeah, Communications Council didn't meet, but they did present and send around to the board members the draft of the Facebook page. And Michelle, do you want to tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll talk about what to do next about that? I think we want to get it up.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because the minutes, the way the motion reads, it says motion to approve the creation by the Communication Council members of a WSESD board presence on social media. So I wasn't sure if we needed to do anything else, unless there were questions or concerns.
I think, well, let me get my screen back. I think what I'd like to do is put this up so people can have a look at it.
Great.
And make sure I get the right one. And then I think because it's going to contain information, is that available now? Can people see that? The Facebook page?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the WSESD board Facebook page draft. And one person liked it despite the instructions not to like it. So I don't know if that ruined it or not, but this is basically a draft. It's a template for what it will look like. And as it says here, the page serves as a community resource to support access to district-wide announcements of events, communications released through the website. For more information, contact the website, which indicates that we need to have, or the Communications Council needs to receive all the district-wide announcements of events and communications released through the SU website. And I would assume that that also means communications and events in each of the schools. Is that part of what you're conceiving?
I was going to ask that question, and I thought that was probably something that needed to go to the whole board, or Andy at least. We don't want to overstep, but I do think that it would be valuable to just anything that's already been released through the district, such as like Andy's letters he's been sending out. If it's been released and sent through the schools, some of those are, please stop.
Oh, no, it sounds great.
Perfect timing. Some of his letters were on the website. And, you know, I think that's a job that we are up for. The members of the Communication Council are up. We're the ones, you know, that are bearing that burden of just making sure the information gets shared. And we're willing, as long as we're not overstepping, you know, onto outside of our space of being a WSESD board.
Well, interesting you should mention that, because the training that Andy and Carrie Amadon and I had on Monday with the Superintendent's Association for the Superintendent's, what do they call it, Andy? That it's not a training session, but your program.
Yeah, the new Superintendent's Academy.
New Superintendent's Academy, yeah. And so we received a whole lot of information, and conveniently for us, Michelle, what it said is that we should just make up these lists and then give them to Andy, and he'll take care of it. So,
nice.
but realistically, I think that if we say that you want to receive everything that goes to parents, to, you know, home to students, I don't know about goes to staff, we'd have to think that through, but and announcements from the various schools, then that's a matter of Andy directing probably the school administrative assistants to put you on their email list, and you just get it, and then you can determine, you know, which ones go up, and you know, but that network, that access has to be established. So that would be, I see Andy's writing it down, so we may be done.
Yeah, Michelle, let's touch base on this one.
Great.
And we'll figure out the best way to get information to you.
Great.
Great. We often, yep. Oh, go ahead, Michelle.
And in the meantime, are we good to go? I mean, I would have loved to have posted tonight's board. The way it would work is we would just create an event and through the page, so that it would be, you know, on alert for anybody who subscribes to the page. And then we would take it upon ourselves to go into the community pages and share that event through the board's page. So are we good to go in that way? Can we start to list off community these meetings, or do we want to wait until another meeting? Do we need to approve anything else?
No, we approved doing this. I
Okay.
think, so if, and we've all looked at it, and I'm just gonna
Okay.
check and see if there's anyone on the, Paul has something to add, which I'm sure will be helpful to the process. But we've approved this, and I think, you know, what needs to be in place and what often doesn't happen is we decide to do things, but then we don't put the structures in place to make sure they happen effectively. So
Okay.
that was why I pointed out the need to establish the communication system to get that information to you and Robin and Jamie.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and Paul Smith?
Mostly my Paul Smith, curriculum coordinator. Mostly my question is around differentiating between WSESU and WSESD. And for instance, the WSESD board is really a subpage of the WSESU site.
Mhm.
And there are things posted on the WSESU site that would go to all of the schools, including Vernon. And I just want to sort of make it clear to the public, it's sort of that there are these different entities, and the WSESD is a part of the WSESU, and isn't, you know, sort of doesn't subsume it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, that's one of the reasons I wanted to be sure to include the breakdown of which schools and communities are represented through this page, and why I was looking for clarification on sharing, you know, like a superintendent letter sent to all of the SU.
Right.
And maybe that's something I, you know, can talk with Carrie more about. And, you know, we certainly want to stay within the confines of our role. But I think for the most part, we're sharing resources.
Right. So
really does come from Andy. That would be.
You don't, for instance, want the school bulletins from Vernon.
No.
And you might. Yeah. Okay. Great. That's fine.
Right.
I think Carrie's got her hand up, and it may turn out that you're going to get the bulletins from Vernon, whether you want them or not.
Thanks. Yeah, Michelle, I'd love to talk to you about it. And look, a lot of Vernon families go to BAMS or BUHS. So I'd like to sort of take what you're doing here and make sure I share it on the Vernon page.
Okay.
And, you know, local page for parents who might have kids attending those schools. I am sure there's a way we can make this all work. And yep,
I would love to collaborate. I think having, you know, information available to whoever will benefit is the way to go. So
the more the better. So
yeah,
you got it. Let's talk.
Great, thank you. So I think that we, let's see, now I have to come back to where we had the agenda so I can see what we're talking about. Okay, so is there anything else with the Communications Council, Michelle?
Not yet. We'll be meeting soon though.
Okay, great. The Climate Crisis Task Force, no, I'm sorry, the Diversity and Equity Committee changed its name to the Social Justice Committee in order to reduce the confusion between the board committee and the school staff committee, primarily school staff committees. Although board members do, one board member is on the staff committee as well. And the Social Justice Committee met. Thomas, would you like to give us a brief?
Yeah, we met on the
report?
24th, so a little over a week ago.
Mm-hmm.
The main things that we discussed, aside from the name change, is how to get a more diverse workforce in the future, what specific steps to take, and then an ongoing project of talking to different people about training for the board and training for administration, and what we would need. We're having a very brief meeting tomorrow, I think at 4:30, with one possible training vendor, and we did. We got some names of other people at the meeting as well that I'll be contacting. And that's it.
Great.
We'll have
Thank you.
a full meeting for the committee later in the month.
Great. Thank you, Thomas. And Carrie, I know we have an SU board meeting coming up. Do you have anything you want to say about that at this point?
No, not yet. We are looking just to schedule that. So if SU board members can be ready to get their schedules out, we do have some things we should get going. So this is hopefully getting us back to our 4 to 5 meetings a year.
Ever hopeful. Great, thank you. And leadership councils, did we have any leadership council meetings during these last 2 intense weeks? Thomas?
BAM's had one yesterday.
Oh, great.
We talked about what's going to happen with reopening, what the ratio of strictly online students to hybrid students would be. Keith, we were also talking about, I believe, outdoor activities, things like that. It was productive.
Great, great, thank you. I don't know if Keith has anything to add. You don't have to, Keith, but if there's anything you want to highlight, feel free. Okay. Other leadership councils. Guilford didn't meet. Michelle and Steve Perrin. Michelle, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I do know that Dummerston did meet. I was away and didn't have a good connection. So I don't know if Juliana's here and has anything to share, but the next meeting will be tomorrow night. And I know they changed their time till 6 o'clock. So it'd be every other Thursday at 6 o'clock.
Great, thank you. Steve, and then Steve Perrin for BUHS, and then Ruby McAdoo from Putney.
Yes, thank you. The high school leadership team met, and we discussed mostly reopening, the process of reopening, and we also discussed ways to transition our leadership council into a more robust, not a PTA, but a parent support group for everybody, and to offer some parent trainings, and also just to do some outreach and diversify the membership of the leadership council. So.
Great, thank you. And thank you, leadership council members, for putting your hands up, so I don't have to sort of keep asking anybody. Ruby?
Hi, Ruby McAdoo, Putney Central School. We had a brief meeting that was very focused on trying to develop a mission statement or a vision statement of some sort. We had good discussion, but we didn't come to any conclusion, so we're still going to be focusing on it. We meet on Thursday this week, tomorrow, and I imagine we'll be focused on the opening of school and how to support her.
Great, great, thank you. Liz Adams.
Yeah, can everybody please be sure to put the Zoom link up for when leadership councils are meeting, because sometimes they're missing. And I've wanted to go to some, but there was no Zoom link for it. So that would be really helpful.
Well, now that everybody knows that we have to post those, that they are formal open meetings, it should be easier. Sean, I didn't think 2 weeks could go by.
Guilford did not meet last week for the first time for a long time, but we will meet this Friday at 1 o'clock, and that agenda will be posted, I believe, pretty soon.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. See no other leadership council reports. We will move on to the administrative reports, and Andy has quite a bit of information to share today.
Yep. We do have a new hire. It's a person that I can share first before I go through the COVID reopening items. So I put forward, there's a pending the availability of certification. Kelly searched high and low for a teacher. Individuals, pending official certification through the AOE. But we're hoping that we could put that forward. I know that Kelly took a long, because it's kind of an indication of the challenges with looking for people. I know Kelly searched far and wide to try to hire someone into this PE role. Her PE position was vacated when her former PE teacher went to BUHS. earlier this summer. Kelly, do you want to? David, is it okay if Kelly shares this person right now?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Perfect time.
Thanks, David. So as Andy said, we would like to bring up a physical education candidate. Her name is Kimberly Gorey. She actually has a background in communication studies and video production, which will be really handy given the times that we're in and asking her to lead remote lessons. And she also has about 8 years of experience in outdoor education. So she manages the supervision of ropes course at summer camps, and she leads extensive groups of campers from age 6 all the way up to 16, all summer long. So she's got a wealth of experience in different areas that we're really actually looking to bring to Academy School right now, which is expanding to outside in the forest for activity and, of course, the remote learning piece. So we would love to hire Kim.
Great. Could you say her name again, please, for our note taker?
It's Kimberly Gorey. Gorey is the last name.
Thank you. And that's for physical education at Academy School.
That's correct.
Thank you. Could I have a motion, please, to accept the nomination of Kimberly for the physical education position at Academy School? Sorry, Cal.
So moved.
Oh, thank you. Sean Murphy has moved it. A second, please.
I second it.
Thank you, Thomas. Thomas Nolan seconded the motion. All those, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please unmute and indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion is accepted. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Kelly. So, as you've seen in the, I've been trying to update the board regularly and weekly to send information to you. I've been sending a combination of both the weekly staff updates as well as the weekly parent updates. So you know that staff returned last week. We had an introductory Zoom meeting where we had close to 600 people in attendance. I think it's a little nerve-wracking when you think, wow, there's 600 people in the room that you're talking to. But when there are only 20 or so people on the screen in front of me, it wasn't as bad. So we also had in attendance that meeting Ruben Garza from the United Way that presented on the community development project with United Way, as well as Scott Noren spoke to the teachers. So our focus on reopening this past week has really been on reopening safely and making sure that that work is done, as to create as safe an environment for everyone as possible. We know that, so in the first couple of days, health protocols and procedures were instantly started. And so all our schools have a health monitoring process where there's a check-in and there's a time period where people they have to screen themselves and report their health conditions, whether they've been around any COVID-19 exposed individuals, or if they themselves have been experiencing any of these symptoms related to COVID-19. This does require taking a temperature. Our schools are primarily using Google Forms to track that information, and so there's an electronic submission of that. So the site-based work began on the 27th, and many of those first days started with a presentation on the general health protocols for the building. And then the teachers had the 28th as well to work, and we had 2 great days of professional development that were district-based. And then school days have been reserved for the 2nd, the 3rd, and teacher time, with some adjustments around the weather. At a few of our schools had some outdoor professional development planned for today, and we had to make some quick changes around that so that people didn't, so that they could really use the outdoor space. So some of the courses that were offered for people, just so that you have a sense of the work that was done in the last couple of days. There was a workshop for teachers around online course design. There was a discussion around centering equity in outdoor education because we have so much work being done in the outdoors this year. on outdoor learning, not just learning outside, but actual outdoor learning and place-based education, that there was a session that was led around, centering equity in outdoor learning. And then designing and creating teacher-made videos and explaining the whys and the hows. And that part was self-paced and asynchronous. Yesterday, there were sessions around creating a foundation for social emotional learning. And as we even saw today, there was a release from the Agency of Education about assessment practices, during the school year. And the secretary is very clear to indicate that our focus when we bring students back in is on the social and emotional health of our students. Let's not worry about assessments. Let's not worry about testing. Let's not worry about those bigger standardized measures like the NAEP or the SBAC. But let's focus on the social and emotional learning health of our students and our staff. And so Greg Stoller led a workshop in the morning around creating a foundation for social and emotional learning. Michaela helped create a group with our diversity coaches around continuing the conversation on race in student and educators, principals and teachers alike were separate, broken into breakout groups. And then there was a final workshop that day on student engagement. And some of those topics included project-based learning, outdoor nature-based education. There were literacy and math workshops as well. So as I said, all the staff had safety training. Then the slides and the presentation I didn't share with you. It was 79 slides long. I can share it. I can create a link this week if you'd like to see it. But it was a robust slideshow that the nurses put together. They spent a good chunk of their summer taking the document, the changing information from the state, our information around reopening our practices, and putting it together in a really coherent and well synthesized presentation. And it was broken out into very, very clear and coherent sections.
I think some of us would love to see at least have the option of taking a look. That'd be great if you could put a link up.
Yeah, and I'll put it into I'll save it into a PDF and send it out this week with the board update. If that is that helpful, David?
Great. Yep.
So as we were saying before, that kind of that emphasis has really been on the routines, the safety routines for everyone. And I want to emphasize, one of the questions that comes up routinely, and I don't go a day without hearing this or hearing a text from a friend or a colleague that's hearing the same question. What happens if there's a question about a COVID exposure, whether that's a case within a school or whether that's within a case in the community? We know that we have to be prepared for these instances. In all these situations, we will be working with the Department of Health on those items. And so we take our guidance. The decisional capacity is in the hands of the superintendent regarding closing of schools, but the superintendent works with the Department of Health to make those determinations. So we shared information. I believe I may have shared it with you all as well, information from the Department of Health around ideas of what is line tracing, and making sure that we have simple things like there's a map that teachers can create a map in their classrooms, for instance, around where are students sitting. So if we have to go back to those maps, we can identify those items. So there is a number of different items around contact tracing and what would take place. But generally, we take our guidance from the department, from the Department of Health, and work with them on any sort of response to that. I want to state also that it depends upon the severity of an outbreak, which would impact the length of a closure if there were a closure. In some cases, a room may be closed for 24 hours and aired out before it's cleaned. In other cases, there may be a more protracted closure, but we would look to feedback from the Department of Health on that. So currently, another question that's come up in the past, the department, about testing of individuals. And I, as a parent with college kids that have shipped off and are still in school and haven't, seen anything happen at their campuses yet, there are questions around testing of individuals. And the statement that we've heard from the Department of Health, and they've been pretty clear about this, is that they do not recommend widespread testing of building occupants at this time. The reasoning for that is because the community spread, or the rate of community spread in the infection rate in Vermont is so low that there's really no epidemiological value to that level of widespread testing for everyone. And so that wouldn't really have any impact. That said, as with everything COVID, this information changes from time to time. And so we have to brace ourselves that they don't see the value in it at this time. However, if circumstances change, they may change their opinion on that. And so As we've said, there are no definites. So we've shared on the website, and we're using our COVID tab on our website, and we know that we've got to do some tweaking of that space. There is a family guidebook on COVID under the COVID tab, and that includes information necessary for parents to review around the start of the school. A question that came up was the idea of masks, and I received a question from a community member about, well, can my child wear a gaiter? You know, the kind of like the buff that you might see in, fishing or skiing or something of that sort. And the mask standards kind of right now indicate that they really don't allow students to wear things like bandanas or buffs. Bandanas, because they might come untied and it might be difficult for a child to reaffix that bandana to knot it properly, and it may not cover enough of the face. And the gaiters, those kind of tubes that kind of go up, some of those are just single ply, and they may not necessarily be thick enough to prevent the spread of any of the aerosolized virus. So we've recommended within that guide that parents would send students to school with an extra mask in the event one gets dirty or falls on the ground, or if it's just hot at the start of the school year and parents need something to, a student may need a different one during the course of the day. Other questions have come up, and this came up last week, around our focus on vulnerable students. And when we think vulnerable students, we kind of put them into a couple categories. One is students that may have had attendance issues last spring. Other students that may have limited internet access, that may not be able to do the work individually at home, or they may be students that academically struggle or may not have that level of support at home. So what we've asked our school leaders to do is to identify in their building spaces, once we kind of move out of the step 2 where the restrictions are really tight, identify areas where students could work if they needed to come download something or get access to the internet. We've asked them to also identify a key point person that will work with their EST groups, their educational solution teams, so that those individuals would kind of help be a point, those point people. If there were students that were missing in the course of the day, or if there are students that had missed a series of school days, that there would be a direct contact person that the teacher could kind of go to. We've talked as a central office team about developing a ticket system as well, kind of almost like a tech request, where if there's a tech problem, teachers submit what's called a ticket, and that identifies a trail to follow things. We want to do a similar process for our students that are kind of dropping off, and students that we're not hearing from, or things that are challenges, so we can identify clearly what's the issue that we're seeing with the student, whether it's attendance, whether it's there's another issue that may be coming up. Maybe it's a food insecurity or housing insecurity, but we have some way to identify what that point of an issue is. And then we can follow that, how we're addressing that through the process. And we're trying to identify where are we finding the holes, where some of those students that might have slipped through the cracks in the past, we can address and we can get to them most effectively. We do know that with, we've talked a little bit about the idea that internet access, and I think we're gonna have to spend the first couple of weeks having counselors. The counselors have a relatively good idea of who the students were last year that didn't have that access. However, we're going to spend the first couple of weeks making sure the counselors contact everyone to identify, questions around access, housing security, food instability, any of those items that may have been an issue in the spring. We want to make sure we're doubling back to and seeing if any of those situations have changed, as well as if there are new situations popping up. So we want to talk about, once we get to step 3, where some of those restrictions are lifted, thinking a little bit more about the day for students, that while they're on remote, can we do some different things? But right now the focus is on how do we open as safely and as smoothly as possible for students before we kind of add another wrinkle into the mix, where some of our staff have worked literally thousands of hours over the course of the summer to pull this together. We want to, we're thinking about what do we do for the first 2 to 3 weeks, and then also at the same time, what happens afterwards. So a couple more things, and then I'll let Frank talk, because I know I'm going over, I don't want to go over my time, but there's a lot of information to share. So I spent the first 2 days with staff back visiting all the buildings. The buildings look phenomenal. Our custodial and facility managers and the maintenance staff did an excellent job in working with those spaces under the direction of the principals in each spaces. Every space was clearly marked. You can see the individuality of the spaces in terms of the signage and what it looked like. But every space looks tremendous. You can see the attention to detail that the principals have within their building, as well as with the facility managers and the pride and the care with it. But hallways were clearly, I was at BUHS and admittedly found myself going the wrong way down a one-way hallway. And making so those are things that we will all adjust to and adapt to, but those signs were clearly installed in all those spaces. Finally, we want to let you know that PPE has been delivered to the staff, so that personal protective equipment has all been delivered to staff. We received additional allocations from the AOE just yesterday, and thanks to Chris Day for helping kind of coordinate all that level of work and picking things up. We are currently full staffed for all our nurses, and we're looking to hire our COVID coordinator for the year. We had 2 summer COVID coordinators that they moved back into their school nurse role, but we're still looking to finalize the details on our COVID coordinator. And last but not least, I will continue my weekly updates to families and staff. I've heard some feedback that some staff and families look forward to receiving the information because it became a bookmark at the end of their week that they could count upon. So that's a lot of information I just threw at you. And I'm happy to take any questions if you have any right now from the board.
It's really nice to get so much specificity, given how long we had to wait to get the information to even start planning, and then once planning and then have some structures in place, and then have the staff back to begin working on what's actually going to happen day to day with the kids. It's really nice to hear that all the specific information. That's really things have tightened up nicely. So I also kind of recognize it for the description for the follow-up with the students with the most vulnerable students and students who aren't participating or aren't regularly there. It's almost like this adjustment is going to force us to develop really effective personalized learning plans for more and more kids, which is actually a really positive thing.
I think there's opportunities in this situation to examine how we're doing things, and I think I think you're absolutely right, David.
Great. Any questions from the board for Andy? Liz Adams?
Yep. So what happens if a school nurse gets sick or injured? I know you're looking for substitute nurses, but what happens in the event that happens? Because do you have to have a school nurse on site?
Well, I would say that there are times where there are school personnel that are authorized to administer many of those items. There are schools in this country and in the state that do function without a nurse.
Well, I'm thinking in terms of COVID. Like if a staff or somebody came down and it looked like COVID, and usually a school nurse would have the training to deal with that. Are there other staff in the school that have that training?
I think all the staff members are screening themselves ahead of time. And so if they're exhibiting those things, I'm certain that the principals are also empowered to say, if you're exhibiting a temperature, you're feeling these things, go home. I mean, that's really what the response is, and the principals take over about finding a body to be in that person's space.
Okay.
Other questions?
David, I had a couple more.
Okay, Liz, go ahead.
So I was wondering about, you had told us that the remote cohorts would be bigger. And my question is, like, what's the size range for them?
I think it depends upon the grade configuration.
I know.
I would have to look. It's a fairly broad range where you have they're all generally double digits. I don't know what the largest one is off the top of my head. The largest one may be in the mid-20s.
Okay. And I guess one last question. I'm kind of a worrywart, so you'll have to put up with me. So are the desks spaced 6 feet apart, or are they 6 feet from where the kid sits to where the next kid sits? And the reason I ask that is because in the frequently asked questions from the AOE website, it says that what does it say? General occupancy in classroom during the school day does not constitute close contact. And that just raised questions for me, because if we're having kids sit, if the desks are 6 feet apart, then the kids are sort of out of the clear, because it seems like the Vermont Department of Health is very strict on it. If you're not within 6 feet for 15 minutes, go away. You know, we're not doing anything. So that's where that question comes from, out of an abundance of caution.
Well, I think the question comes out when feasible, when possible, and everything within the AOE and within their guidelines or the CDC is always, always spoken in a matter of when feasible, when possible. And so I think the classrooms reflect that balance of when feasible and when possible. And student-centered, student head-to-head, 6 feet apart is generally what they're looking at.
Okay.
Thank you. Michelle?
Hey, Andy.
Michelle.
I just had a clarifying question that I'm looking at all the information. It seems like a lot of our response plan goes back to, well, we'll look for guidance from the health department. And then some of it is at your discretion if I'm reading things correctly. So I'm wondering very specifically if a student is test positive or if they have significant exposure, like a family member at home, will their immediate peers in their cohorts or classes, if they're in high school, would those families be notified that their student was potentially exposed?
And the answer is, it depends. And they will contact this, it's clear as mud, Michelle. They will, in some cases, we've heard that there will be people, there will be people informed. In other cases, they are not. And this is one of the frustrating things. We filled out a survey today for the Department of Health to identify, and for the AOE to identify who are the key contact people in all the schools for contact tracing. So probably principal and a nurse would be contacted, and then they'll go through the conversation over where people are. I can send, and I'll send, I think I sent it the prior week about the types of information. I'm looking at it right now. It's a case actions checklist, and then there's a what to do when there's a case, and so what is close contact and who to interview and what would happen, and that kind of gets through some of the notifications. So I'll send that back out to the board this week for that level of clarity on it.
Now, how much of this would be at your discretion? I'm just thinking about disease control and those guidelines of being 6 feet, less than 6 feet for 15 minutes are so tricky when you're talking about a high school student spending 2.5 hours in a room, and you know, just people who have people at risk in their lives, like a grandparent, and you know, maybe they would wait, not visit that weekend. So I'm just thinking about, you know, basic disease control of sort of being known. Is any of this at your discretion, or is this just out of your hands?
In terms of notifying people, it's really following the guidance from the health department and working with them for their protocol. You know, the environments are so, there's a tricky balance between, you know, HIPAA, FERPA, and the need to know. And because the schools are so small, it's difficult to share with the family. Your child may have been exposed to COVID without exposing the identity of the person that may, and that's really where the balancing act comes in of to what extent can we notify, to what extent, where was the infection acquired, that type of you know, question and answer stem will go through. And again, this is all information that we could look at this, it's still changing on a day-to-day basis. As I'm kind of going through as I'm looking, even refreshing my eyes on the Vermont docs again, making sure that everything's in place. And so, you know, having a line list, for instance, of like seating charts and class schedules and staff movements and bus seating charts, all those different things, and then being able to, you know, look at what the next steps have to be. And so, you know, the Department of Health, you know, talks about notifying them if a staff person's, you know, has been identified at the school. Well, no, that we've identified a staff person to do this, but this is really all like having the conversation with the Department of Health to following the next steps. In some cases, there may be some notification. In other cases, there may not be. I know it's clear as mud, and it's.
Okay. It is what it is. Thank you.
So I will be sharing, just in terms of this week's parent update, I'll give you a sneak peek, and it's kind of fresh on the heels of the incident up at Killington. One of the worries that I have going into the weekend and into a long weekend where people typically gather and enjoy the company of family and friends on a long weekend, is that people may be letting their guard down a little bit and not following some of those social distancing norms and some of those quarantining norms, and making sure that people are still masked, they're still wearing what they have to wear while they're out in public, and they're still maintaining that level of staying 6 feet apart from people and not having that level of physical connection. While they're out in public, because this weekend is a worry, and I think it's a worry that a lot of communities have of what is it going to look like when it's typically a weekend with a lot of activities going on. Making sure that people are staying safe and following the guidance that they need to.
That's a little, I was just assuming that if the school found out that the student who had been in the building was tested positive, that anyone that person was in contact with would find out. So it's a little bit unsettling, but I also haven't looked deeply enough into it to understand what the thinking is. So I'm not going to ask you to respond to that because you can't. It's not. We don't get to decide that. Thanks, Kelly.
Well, kind of along those lines, I would think that if there was, let's say there's student A who for some reason either has tested positive or has been exposed to it, and for some reason other students or families of other students have to be notified, I would think that there would be more than just one family being notified that, okay, well, your child has been exposed or has the potential. So they wouldn't necessarily need to say, well, student A is the one that is at the center of this all. They would just be telling a number of students, and then all those students would just sort of be home, or so I don't know that it's. I can envision that a student wouldn't necessarily have to be outed as being the source of it, and other students and their families can certainly be informed of their potential exposure, and maybe that they have to do whatever it is that needs to happen, whether it's quarantining or testing or whatever. But I can see where students and families could be notified, but then and just not be disclosed which student is at the center of it.
Yeah, I think in looking at it and examining the documents, a lot of it depends upon what that initial conversation is, and that will be the determination of, do people have, when was the infectious time period? I mean, there's so many things that go into this virus, like when was the infectious time period, and when was that individual, exposed? When were they exposed to other people, or when were they around other people that may have caused an impact? And so I think that's really the part with the line tracing from the Department of Health and working with the schools, of trying to establish those patterns. So to not inform people needlessly, but at the same time notify people as necessary. And this is where as I said to Michelle, it's clear as mud in certain ways, but it's that line tracing piece of having the contact at the school to be able to talk with the school nurse or the principal to then track down that information of saying, okay, so where were they sitting if this happened? If we can zero in on, we know it happened and they were infectious on this date. Where were they sitting? Where were they in the classroom? What was taking place? That's all information that we've shared with the staff around identifying some of those simple things like seating charts and routines and norms and those typical movement patterns, so we can identify if someone had to be notified, we could do so. Or if there was a larger spread, we could identify, we would look at what the next steps are with that as well.
Thank you. I see a couple of questions, but I'm going to, from the public, but I'm going to wait until a couple of minutes and ask people if they do have questions to please formulate your question as succinctly as you can. Please don't tell us any stories, just ask the questions directly as you can. But before we do that, there are a couple of things I wanted to ask about. We're nearing 2 more days of professional development, and then kids come on Tuesday after the long weekend. And I assume that there'll be a survey of the staff after the at the end of the professional development days to get some feedback on how, I'm not sure what the questions would be, but one question I would like to be sure is included is what, now that this is done, what support do you need? Maybe not necessarily on Friday, but sometime in the next few days, what support do you need now? What more do you need? Or, what's missing in terms of being able to really be effective? And I know you've got people that can formulate questions really well, but I think, for the next meeting, I think we'd like to have a report on that. And we certainly want to see enrollment data, the numbers of students participating, the numbers that are not, or at least aren't there all the time. And, solid numbers in terms of who's remote and who's not. I think we know it's 25 or 30%. It's just, really specific about that data, so we can kind of track the effectiveness over time. And let's see what. I guess those are the 2 important things. You didn't mention ventilation. I assume that work is ongoing and our rooms are all in good shape. And
yes, and so I think Frank,
Yeah.
we're going to share on ventilation, Frank, or I can just share where we are with that.
Yeah, well, I was going to speak to the financial report, but
Okay, I can mention what we talked about with ventilation.
Yeah. Great, go ahead, Andy.
So
yeah, just briefly.
I'll do it quickly. So Robert Clark, I'm sorry, my computer is dinging now. Robert Clark is, he's waiting on a couple different reports. They did an initial survey a few weeks back. And so he's waiting on, the purpose of the reports was to inform the work in the classrooms that has to be done around the control mechanisms to adjust the airflow, basically. And so he's waiting on that information to be finalized so that they can make additional tweaks to the rooms. And so that information is not complete yet, but those, the HVAC work is proceeding as needed right now. And we're assuming that work on those control modules will be done within a couple of weeks.
And all of the learning spaces are going to be adequately ventilated according to the,
yes.
I can't remember the acronym.
The standard. Yes.
Yeah, great. And then the other thing, and if other board members have information that they want to hear about after a couple of weeks, or what do we want to do to sort of track the effectiveness and the success of the reopening, please speak up. The only other thing I wanted to mention was sports will be starting I believe on Monday or Tuesday as well, and my reading of the guidance is that all the athletes have to have the mask on at all times. They can take mask breaks, but they need to be wearing the mask at all times except for cross-country running. Is that still the case?
Yes.
Good. I think there's a tendency when you're winded to use the mask as a chin strap rather than a mask. And I think it's really important to make sure that those coaches know that if students are observed doing that, that's going to be the end of their season. That we're not going to, we can't have people being leisurely about using masks and being the person that puts an end, that closes the schools again. So I think that's after school, and it's sometimes easy to think that the rules don't really apply, and sometimes you're away from the campus or somebody's not looking. And I think it's really important for those people, especially when the coaches are not employees of the system and aren't hearing this as consistently and for as long a time as you all have been hearing it. It's really important for that message to get to those coaches and to those students. So I want to just encourage a really clear focus on being really, make sure that they understand the seriousness of that. Any other board members any other things that we want to be sure we are informed about? Oh, good. That makes for an easy week for you, Andy. Nothing to do. Tara Castine, again, be as succinct as you can, please.
Yes, thanks. Tara Castine from Putney. I want to, Kelly brought up a very good point, and I brought it up a few times, that we don't need to know who within the school is having it, but I think the more people know that there's an issue, especially, I've asked if the district can make a list of people who are considered essential and making sure that those people are notified, so that they can either pull their kids or make other arrangements for their hybrid days would be warranted and very nice as an essential worker. You know, I mentioned this a few times, that having a flag system that just says, hey, red, someone in the district or someone in the school building has COVID. Yellow, someone's getting tested. Green, all is good. Something that just says to parents that are essential that, you know, it's okay to send their kid to school that day would be great. Thanks.
Thanks. Any other questions? Okay. Frank has some final, well, not final report, the report going to the auditors from last year, and I think some other fiscal updates for us. Frank?
Yes. David, could I do the screen share?
Yes. Let me click the proper button.
Okay.
Okay, that should work.
All right. Here we go. Okay, so I had, David, I don't know if you had a chance to send the financial statements to the board members.
I didn't. I thought that I saw that you'd copied them all. I didn't, but fortunately here it is.
Okay, very good.
And plus they get you to explain it, which is a lot easier than trying to figure it out.
Right. So I've shared 3 statements with you. This is the fiscal year ending for the Windham Southeast School District through June 30th of 2020. It's what we're now submitting to the auditors, and we'll be engaging with the auditors for the next several weeks. So I'll start with the most important financial statement. It might not be the most familiar to you, but it's the most important one from the point of view that it takes in all of the financial transactions, whether it be revenue, expenditures, you know, liabilities, and ultimately boils it down to the one number that we all do very much pay attention to, and I'm sure you're familiar with that, and that is fund balance. So here's a quick overview of the balance sheet. This shows that we ended the fiscal year with $8.5 million in assets, and most of that is in cash, which is always a good fiscal position to be in. We had claims against those assets of nearly $4 million. Most of that is the accrued salaries. This would be for our teachers who actually earned $2.5 million in compensation as of June 30th, but said, hey, we'd like to get paid over the summer. So very common in public schools. But when you take the difference between your assets of $8 million and your liabilities of the $4 million, come down with the all-important number of fund balance. It's what you actually own once claims are paid, once your bills are paid. So we began the year after merging the other entities, the legacy entities as of July 1st, 2019. We started with $4.2 million in equity on balance. And this year we can talk briefly here about the difference between the revenue and expenditures for the fiscal year ending 2020. We had a surplus of $277,000. So that increases our fund balance from $4.2 million to $4.5 million. This is the general operating fund. This is not the the capital fund, the student activity fund, the endowment fund. We have several funds. This is the one that the taxpayers are primarily interested in as it relates to the budget development and what is the results of budgeted versus actual. It's $277,000 favorable. You may recall I had forecasted a favorable fiscal year end. back in April when we first started trying to understand the pandemic. And so, it's from a fiscal point of view, this is a great place to be, as opposed to what could be a very, very challenging situation if we had a deficit in the prior year that we had to absorb in a future budget planning. We're not in that position. We're in a very solvent financial position. So there's some good news. Going on to more along the lines of a budget report, which really only focuses on revenue and expense. It doesn't deal with so many of the other financial transactions that come into play with a balance sheet. Maybe one last comment on the balance sheet. It's the accumulation of all transactions over the entire history of the organization from the day it was created. And in the Windham Southeast School District case, it's still pulling in the results of maybe 100 years of public school operations, and that accumulated these assets, and over many, many years accumulated this fund balance. When we go to a revenue and expense statement, we are only looking at one 12-month period. And that's what we will be focusing on in October, November, December, if we follow our traditional budget planning cycle for 1 year, which is fiscal year 22, that starts in July of 2021 and ends in June of 2022. But here's the results of our operation for the previous and the first fiscal year of the Windham Southeast School District. We had a revenue budget of $49,574,000. We actually received $49,087,000, meaning we received nearly $500,000 less than what we had budgeted. And that's no surprise. You may recall one of the major variances we knew would occur. We created a budget under the old legacy systems because of the lateness of the formation of the district. And we knew that Guilford was not going to pay $380,000 in tuition because they're now absorbed as part of this system. So that's why that's about $300,000 short, and as expected. The financial statements that get a lot more attention are, of course, the expenditures. So here's the results of expenditures. We have, in this case, I've presented expenditures in 3 formats. They're all at the summary level. This format is by school. So let me go to the total. Here's our $50 million budget. Here's how we spent $48.8 million. And we had a favorable variance against spending of $1.7 million. But it's important to recognize that we had planned on running $1 million deficit here. This is the budget number. Right? So we budgeted $49 million, and we planned on giving back $1 million of fund balance. Well, the reality is that we received $49 million and we spent $48.9 million, almost exactly what we had planned. So this is actually a favorable development. And you may recall on the first page, I said we ran a $277,000 surplus. Well, there's where that number comes from. The difference between the actual revenues minus the actual expenditures. The variances by school are as, again, we might expect. Here's the Guilford variance, one of the largest variances on the page. And again, it's because they didn't cut a check for $380,000 for tuition to BAMS. That created that favorable variance. Aside from that, they were remarkably almost exactly on their budget. The negative variance in Putney is largely attributed to the second grade teacher that we hadn't planned on because of a class size of 28 students that came in after the budget plan was put together. Overall, very favorable fiscal result, given all of the uncertainty in the circumstances and the way the budget was developed. One last page showing you the same information in two different formats. So again, the $50 million in budgeted spending and the $48 million actual with that same number, 1.7 million favorable. But we're looking at it, what the state requires us to capture information, and that is what's referred to as the object level. So that's salary, benefits, professional services, maintenance, tuition, and then supplies, equipment, and debt. Okay, so this is taking our $50 million budget and saying, well, if we look at it from a functional point of view, how did we do? And there's really no surprise in this data as I look at it, in that where we see a variance, we can pretty easily explain, like here, property and equipment. Well, you may recall the Career Center had some grants that were not large grants that were not able to be implemented because of some timelines and various changes. And also, you know that having school closed, shut down in March, that affects so many different programs and the supplies that would be acquired. The other thing that is notable is the electricity was quite favorable. For some of you, you've been aware that over time we've worked hard at bringing on power from a solar array, electricity. We've dropped our electricity purchasing from about $500,000. Now we're going down below $300,000 as a result of that really substantial savings coming from the solar array from Windham Solid Waste Management. That's the net metering contract. One last group of numbers, and I'll wrap up my overview for you. So again, the same expenditures of this $50 million budget and the 48 million actual spent, but it's now looking at, again, what the state has organized on what's called a functional level. So meaning direct instruction, vocational, athletic, these are called functions as it relates to capturing financial information. Student support services, instructional support services, school board, administration, operations and maintenance, transportation, and food services. So once again, we're looking at the same overview, but we're looking at capturing information at the service, kind of the functional service level. I could speak to any questions you might have, but maybe at a very summary level. When you look at the variances, and mostly you can see there are surpluses against the plan. The universal explanation is, well, we shut down school in March and we deferred or avoided a number of costs. That's the common thread. This one is a significant variance. So, it's very obvious the spring sports didn't happen, caused a substantial surplus there, and so on. This support services was part of, part of, again, this is where there was an equipment procurement here in the 1.6 million. We only spent 1.4. And this is the area, this is instructional support. This is where a fair amount of professional development would normally have taken place, which caused that surplus. So Administration was less than budgeted because of a vacancy there that has been filled. So there's my overview. You know, happy to report that we are going into the new fiscal year with a you know, good solvent financial position, and I don't anticipate much of a change as a result of the audit, but it won't be final until they issue their report, and I would expect to see that in November.
Thank you, Frank. What I'd like to do is, because I didn't look carefully enough to see that that wasn't copied to the board, and I just, you know, hadn't been at this long enough to double check those things. I apologize. But what I'd like to do is forward these to the board tomorrow, and then remind people before the next meeting to have a close look at them in case they do have any questions, because I think it'd be kind of hard to formulate the questions. I did have one thing I'd like you to clarify. Ann has a question, but I'll get to that in a second. And I know that when we start the budget process, I hope we'll get all the detail we got the last time, including the cheat sheet that explains all the different numbers and objects and all of that, so we can really dig into that. I expect that we'll see that then. But just one really specific question: the $4 million that is in that fund now, what does the statute allow us to do with that money, or direct us to do, if there is a direction?
Sure. 2.3 million of that is specifically reserve for general education expenditures that's been on the Brattleboro Union High School books for several years. They from time to time add to that, and then other times they have subtracted from that. But that's the current balance, about 2.3 million. So, you know, this is something that we haven't pressed the Agency of Ed for an opinion on, but the general articles of agreement indicated that you know, reserve funds would be you know, essentially acknowledged on the financial statements of the successor organizations, you know, just like an endowment fund is and a capital fund is, and so on. The unique thing about that reserve is that it's a general education purposes. So unlike a capital fund where it's a specific, you know, building improvement. So that's a question, David. But generally, fund balance in the general operating fund is available to reduce the future tax assessment. And that's, you recall in my earlier comments here, that $1 million deficit was exactly that. It's using prior fund balance. So that's its primary purpose. And there are some minor reserves on that going back to the balance sheet, the 4.5 million. Things that like a prepaid insurance and that kind of thing, but that's it.
So a couple of million of that that isn't already basically reserved.
Yep.
What would do we have? What I'm wondering is, could we use that to pay for the academy project? To be really explicit about it, could we shift that to the capital fund and use it to pay for those renovations, or that new space?
Well, the answer is, well, typically you can transfer the current surplus. So in this case, the 277. But because the boards are supposed to take action on transfers that are related to the fiscal year that they were generated. So I think the more that kind of the technical answer is, every fiscal year end you ask this question, you know, and then that's where you take, in this case, the 277, and that's the board's discretion for transfers to a capital reserve fund. That is absolutely in the board's authority. the statutes are, and they're not 100% clear on what you can do with a legacy general operating fund balance, other than you can always put a warning on a special meeting article or
Right.
your annual meeting and say, will you do this or that?
Right.
With so as I said, the typical use is to apply a portion of the fund balance against reduction of taxes, and specifically, to what extent can you obligate this money to say, for example, the Academy project? I think the clear answer is you could definitely authorize me tonight to transfer the $277,000 to the capital fund, and that's actually something that we have done in the past. I haven't raised the issue just because of the uncertainty of the road ahead in the general fund.
Mm-hmm. Well, that seems like to maintain flexibility seems like a really good idea. And I wish I didn't. I just thought of that now, and I wish I'd given you some advanced. Let you have that in advance, because it's. I know it's really complex, and the statutes are confusing, no matter how many times you read them. But I know we can, if we want to use it. If we put a warning article in front of the annual meeting, we can move it pretty much wherever we want if we get approval. So that's good to know, because I think next year or the year after, we may be moving some money around.
Yep. And David, if I could just mention,
sure,
that when we drop below 5% of our budget in fund balance, and then the state throws something new at us that we could not have anticipated, that's when we lose the ability to sort of smooth out the tax rate. And
right.
That's, and we're in a very good shape right now. We have that buffer, but it's not so large that, we know how we are going to weather the fiscal year 22 with all of the, the information we're getting out of the legislature.
Right. Great. Thank you.
I did have a.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I did have a few other things to report. I'm very brief, but yeah, I guess
don't see any blue hands to talk about this or ask questions, so I think you can go right ahead, Frank.
Excellent. Okay. I just mentioned that, tax bills, we all know tax bills went out late, so we're doing the best we can to manage cash flow, and it's great to work with Andre Yeager at the town office of Brattleboro. He's I believe, going to be able to help us avoid borrowing for meeting our general operating fund cash flow. Another positive development is we finished the fuel oil bid. The good news is our total volume drops every year because we have more and more systems going to biofuel. But I coordinated the oil bid with the town of Brattleboro, as I have done in the past. I was very surprised to see $1.25.9 as the low bid. We had a very high range of numbers, but that's pretty significantly below our budget figures. So that's a favorable development for the year going forward. This heating season. I just wanted to mention that I spoke with Corey Frisee from Stevens and Associates on the Academy project. As you recall, back in the late spring, the board authorized Stevens Associates to work with me in preparing the information materials that would advance that project toward a bond vote. So that's underway. I have forwarded a contract to Stevens Associates to carry on that work in light of the board's approval. And then just one last thing is, it's just today, the Agency of Ed opened up and facilitated an application for the CARES Act funding reimbursement. So we did submit a projected budget of about a little under $1 million for the CARES Relief Fund reimbursement. And we also submitted, as required by the Agency of Ed just recently, a application for reimbursement through FEMA. If the FEMA application is approved, the Agency of Education will deduct whatever we get from FEMA from our $1 million applications. But just letting you know that we're on top of that.
Great.
The challenges of trying to access that funding.
Great. Thank you, Frank. Are there any questions from the board? Seeing none, we can move to unfinished business, which won't take long because we don't have any. And the new business requests, the first one, and we just found out that, well, you were here, so you heard Pietro, Lynn tell us that we can't change our agenda. And I think I have to change this one because I told Barb that what we wanted was, or what the Putney Selectboard was asking for was to park vehicles in the circular driveway. And recently I was told that actually it's to run traffic through the circular driveway so you can paint the BLM, the Black Lives Matter sign on the Westminster West Road.
That is not the case. I left the Putney Select Board meeting at 5:59 to come here. That was the original plan, but our road crew indicates it would be impractical and unnecessary. The request remains to park.
Okay,
for the
great.
volunteers to park there. No access to the building is sought. No celebration is planned. It's just to facilitate the flow of traffic and keep the volunteers from being run over. The crew will be capped at 20. So I don't even imagine there will be 20 cars.
And that's not going to be on a school day or during school hours.
I'm sorry, it will be on Sunday, September 13th in the morning. We don't anticipate there being much traffic either. Again, it's just an abundance of caution.
Well, great. You can bring us pictures for the 16th then. So I would then entertain a motion to approve the use of the circular driveway in front of Putney Central School on September 13th to park vehicles, period.
So moved.
Thank you, Liz. Moved by Liz Adams. Could I have a second, please?
I second it.
Thank you, Michelle. Michelle Green. It's been moved and seconded to approve a request from the Putney Select Board to park vehicles in the circular driveway in front of Putney Central School on September 13th. Kelly has a question.
Well, actually, it's not to do with this. It's, I didn't raise my hand fast enough when Andy was talking. And when he reports back, I'm just curious how many students are taking advantage of the sports. That's
okay. Oh, great. Okay. Well, so that's done. Yeah. And
thank you.
Great. So I'm sure Andy heard that. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed to the use of the driveway for parking? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you, Ann. That's a great idea. And we have an executive session, but first we're going to have, I messed this up last time. I'm not going to do it wrong this time. Public comment on non-agenda items. Things that were not on the agenda that someone would like to comment on or make a statement. Ruby McAdoo from Putney. Oh, you're going to say that.
Hi, Ruby McAdoo from Putney. I wanted to share, this is a continuation of what I raised at the last meeting. I know that everyone now knows about why Aspire's doing a program. I know that at Putney Central School it was just released to everyone that's helping support the hybrid kids on their non-school days. And I just wanted to share that we had some community members and Liz showed up for a meeting on Sunday that helped to kind of think about ways to collaborate to expand what would be a hub, a childcare hub. and Vermont After School was on the call, and I think a lot of that was thanks to Liz's involvement. The reason I'm just raising this is so that everyone here is aware that this kind of collaborative work is happening. I think it's really essential that the school board and our district is part of that in the sense that it is informed by the decisions that the school is making, that the collaborators and the care organizations that are providing care for our kids, that they have a line to the school. And you know, in Putney, we're trying to help Sue of the Meeting Waters YMCA, who runs Y Aspire, try to locate more sites. You know, they're focused on getting what they have up and running, but I think the state wants to expand a certain number of slots, and in this area that means expanding a program. So we're trying to think of creative solutions that aren't in the school because they can't use sites of the school site, that would bring things closer to Putney. And I would encourage anyone who's interested in collaborating or thinking about sites in your towns, you're welcome to be in touch with me. I'm sure you can be in touch with Liz, or if you know Sue Fortier, be in touch with Sue Fortier. So that's just to share that information.
Thank you, Ruby. Any other public comments on items not on the agenda? Shannon?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I had to call in separately, so I wasn't sure if it was working. I had, I guess, a question and a comment. I had heard that the remote students were going to be starting September 14th, that date had been pushed back, and I was just wondering if it would make sense to push everyone to the September 14th date, because I know from colleagues I've spoken to at schools throughout the district, teachers are trying to put a good face on, and we're trying to be positive, and we're working really hard and at school and there on the weekends and trying to prepare, but with all the additional safety precautions that we're needing to put in place, I think many teachers are feeling very unprepared to start on that Tuesday that we have planned. If there are any other teachers here that could speak to that, I would appreciate that, because I'm going out on a limb here, but people are under a lot of stress and we have very long to-do lists to ensure our students' safety. And I think many people are feeling unprepared to begin on that Tuesday with all that we have to put in place to make sure our students are safe. So thanks for hearing me.
Thanks, Shannon. Liz, this is for the public comment on non-agenda items. You are public too, but so I'm going to do the public first. Corey Sorensen.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to actually express concern about paraeducators in classrooms when kids are eating lunch at the schools. I think that people have done a lot of good work to prepare for the school year, and I am feeling positive and excited to go back. And I actually do agree with Shannon that if remote is starting on the 14th, it would make sense for everybody to start on that day and have that time to continue to prepare, because there's a lot of, I mean, kids are in the classrooms without masks and mostly with paraeducators, and paraeducators are with students, in the classroom without masks during lunch. And paraeducators are working one-on-one with kids who are clingy, and I'm concerned about paras, and I'm wondering if hazard pay is on the agenda at all for paras who are working closely with kids. And yeah, I guess I'll stop there. So.
Thank you, Corey. Liz?
This is actually not about teachers, so I don't want to bump any teachers out of the way if there's
There's
teachers.
nobody else.
Okay, I wanted to add on to Ruby's, and it's just for purely for public information, because people don't have it, and if people come to the board, you know, saying,
okay, go ahead.
Kids. Okay, so the child referral specialist that's located at Winston Prouty, they report that there are spaces open in family child cares, both registered, and they also know of the non-registered ones that they are giving out names to at this point in time because of all the slots that are needed. So, you know, because somebody's unregistered, they might not be good, but they might be fine. They just don't want to deal with all the garbage that goes along with that. So I wanted everybody to know that they can call that referral line, and they might get a referral to a program in their area. That's all.
Great. Thank you, Liz. Seeing no other, I would entertain a motion to enter executive session under 1 VSA 313 to discuss a personnel matter related to employee stipend schedule and a student placement matter where the board has determined that premature general public knowledge would clearly place the school board or people involved at substantial disadvantage. And we're inviting the superintendent into the executive session. I'm going to pause the recording right now while I'm thinking of it, because when I don't, it doesn't happen. And well, no, I won't. And
David, should we properly move?
yeah, so let's get the motion. Motion to enter executive session. I moved it for those two reasons. Can I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Thomas. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. I would ask everyone else to leave, and Wendy and where is
Mr. Chair,
yes.
do you need me to stick around after executive session?
We may have an action.
Okay, I will stick around then if you want to put me in the waiting room. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just looking for Rich to. A button to do it with. Oh, wait, I do. But I have a feeling if I restart it, it's going to be a new recording because the icons are gone.
I was able to do it.
Okay, so we are live again?
Yep.
Okay, so we rose from executive session at 9:14. And I would entertain a motion to accept the administrator's proposal on student placement as presented.
Zan Beekman from Putney, so moved.
Thank you, Ann. May I have a second, please?
Second, Liz from Putney.
Liz Adams from Putney, second. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Okay. Let's see. I don't see any other business.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
There being no further business before this board, I move that we adjourn.
Seconded.
Second.
Thank you, Thomas. It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 That's the end of it. Say aye.
We are done.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, God.